Isaiah 48, 1 through 11. Hear this, O house of Jacob, who are called by the name of Israel, and who came from the waters of Judah, who swear by the name of the Lord and confess the God of Israel, but not in truth or right. For they call themselves after the holy city and stay themselves on the God of Israel. The Lord of hosts is his name. The former things I have declared of old, they went out from my mouth and I announced them. Then suddenly I did them and they came to pass. Because I know that you are obstinate and your neck is an iron sinew and your forehead brass, I declared them to you from of old. Before they came to pass, I announced them to you, lest you should say, my idol did them. My carved image and my metal image commanded them. You have heard, now see all this, and will you not declare it? From this time forth, I announce to you new things, hidden things that you have not known. They are created now, not long ago. Before today, you have never heard of them, lest you should say, behold, I knew them. You have never heard, you have never known. From of old your ear has not been opened. For I knew that you would surely deal treacherously, and that from before birth you were called a rebel. For my name's sake, I defer my anger. For the sake of my praise, I restrain it for you, that I may not cut you off. Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction. For my own sake, I do it. For how should my name be profaned? My glory I will not give to another. Thanks be to God.
No one likes a hypocrite. There are numerous reasons why, but hypocrisy by nature is deceptive. And so a hypocrite presents an exaggerated presentation of the best of themselves to the world, hides their flaws, but then moralizes, pointing out flaws in others that they themselves have, but they're not owning. It can be infuriating. It's confusing to interact with that. And it's one of the reasons why Jesus is so compelling. Right away, the New Testament begins in Matthew's gospel with Jesus offering something of substance, but warning us not to be like hypocrites. And in Matthew 5-7, perhaps his most famous body of teaching, the Sermon on the Mount, that seems to be one of the things that he's getting at. He teaches us to pray, and he says, but don't be like the hypocrites who love to stand in public, offering long prayers in order to be seen by others. They're not praying out of devotion, they're praying for social standing. And there's something compelling about the courage of Jesus to stand in front of those who have power and influence in society and to expose them in order to offer something better, something more substantial. There's something about that that grips us. We want what's real. We don't want to be hypocrites, and we don't want to fall for blindly following hypocritical leaders. And so there's something very exciting about Jesus who's able to see through it and offer us an alternative way. And so then we say, we're not going to be like them. We're going to follow the teachings of Jesus, and so we're going to do them. We're going to not live like the hypocrites, but we're going to take the things that Jesus says in that very
To listen that Jesus is not just replacing one program with another, but he's actually calling us to something radical.
He's bringing a renewal from the inside out that depends on our trusting him, our listening to everything that he's saying, and not just trying harder to do the things that he teaches. But it does raise the issue for anyone trying to improve their lives, but certainly a conversation in the church. We don't, or we shouldn't, want to be hypocrites. There's something very dissatisfying about that experience. And so how do we get out of this trap of hypocrisy? Jesus offers us a way forward through it. And so today, with this topic, I want to highlight three things. First, the inner turmoil of hypocrisy. Then the lure of relief with idolatry. And then finally, the integrity of the way of Christ. So I want to begin with the inner turmoil of hypocrisy. So it'd be easy for us to get together and vent our frustrations about the hypocrites out there. But if we want to grow, it's worth being willing to pause and say, well, what about me? What about my hypocrisy? Because the reality is, to the degree that we feel any bit of conviction that we might ourselves be hypocritical, it troubles us. And so that's not good. There's a turmoil that comes from that disconnect of presenting a certain reality to the public and trying to hide a certain reality that's in you. Now, that tension is there in all of us. There is something wrong in the world, and it makes its way into all of our lives, and so all of us are flawed. And it can be confusing how to navigate that. So do you need to be authentic to yourself? Does the world need to see everything going on inside of you? Well, certainly not. If you have a coworker that gets you angry and you're thinking, I want to tell you that I hate you, the choice not to do that is not necessarily hypocritical. That could be maturity, that you've learned to restrain your emotions. You've learned to discern. Just because I think this or feel it doesn't mean that it's right. That could be a sign of being ethical. And so not being transparent with everything you're thinking is not hypocrisy. But then when you start the YouTube channel Free from Anger, and you're giving people tips on how to live such a restrained life without owning that you're working very hard to restrain frustrations in you that are overwhelming, that's when you've crossed a line from mature and ethical. And that line is hard to tell within us because all of us need to recognize we desire things, we have impulses that we can't act on. We're not being fake by presenting an alternative to the world. And yet there's something that causes turmoil in us, that reality. Wouldn't it be better if we were whole, if we really wanted what was good, if we really discerned what was right, if we could just act on every impulse? Well, none of us can do that. Part of the maturing process is to recognize that we need to grow. So in the passage we're looking at, the first verse, God is charging his people with this kind of conflict. Hear this, O house of Jacob, who are called by the name of Israel. This is verse 1. And who came from the waters of Judah, who swear by the name of the Lord and confess the God of Israel, but not in truth or right. So it's not in truth. There's something false. There's something not being honestly portrayed, and it's not right. Something is wrong. Something is out of order. Something needs to be corrected, made right, justified. And so the issue of idolatry that's a theme in Isaiah, it's not that they said, you know what, we're tired of serving Yahweh, the creator. We no longer want to hold on to our identity as descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we're just going to become like the Assyrians or the Babylonians. The problem was they would still go to the temple. They would still make their offerings. But in their desperation, they would sneak away and they would secretly worship an idol. And then they would show up not confessing that they did that at the temple, but acting as though maybe God didn't see it. And so God is pointing out, this is not good. You're claiming to be my people, but inside, I can tell what's going on. And so Jesus, who comes to bring the same message to his generation in Matthew 15, quotes the words of Isaiah 29, previous chapter in Isaiah. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And Christians know that there should be an alignment, but what happens when you show up at church knowing I'm supposed to sing these words, but honestly thinking, but I don't know if I believe them today. Well, that's not hypocrisy. But we can easily degenerate into hypocrisy with that. But there's that turmoil in us, that tension. And one of the ways that it works itself out in our lives, why do we hate hypocrites? Well, certainly because hypocrisy is wrong. And so there's a just impulse in us to hate hypocrites. But if we want to do some reflection about ourselves and think about, well, what about our own hypocritic impulses? Is one of the reasons that we resent hypocrites, not simply because there's something wrong with them, but because intuitively we carry a sense that there's something wrong with us. So part of the problem with a hypocrite is they're exaggerating how good they are. And that troubles us, especially if we believe it. If we don't yet see through their being hypocritical, that exaggerated self troubles us if we're walking around with a sense that we're not good enough. And we should be the kinds of people, ideally, that when somebody is great, that we could admire them and be inspired to work harder to become like them. But if they're too great, and if we're too discouraged about ourselves rather than being inspired, that self-loathing makes us trapped in that sense of anger. And so you could hate yourself, which is too much to bear. So occasionally, if you could find somebody else to hate, it provides relief. There's no getting away from hating. And so if I could hate you for some reason, that gives me relief from hating myself. And for a period, it feels like relief, but it's not relief. And so the exaggerated self, rather than rejoicing, wow, what wisdom, it's so inspiring. In our petty self-centeredness, we wind up resenting them because it stirs something in us. And then when they're exposed as a hypocrite, it brings relief because we're inadvertently playing this game of moral comparison that I felt worse about myself because I thought they were better. And now that I find that they're empty, I finally feel better about myself, and so it's a time of rejoicing. But the problem is that self-loathing, that intuitive sense that something's wrong doesn't go away so easily. So the way some of our minds reason, when the hypocrite is exposed, we have moments of rejoicing. I knew that they were fake, and now I feel better about myself. And then that weird thought, what's wrong with me that I believed it? Why am I so easily deceived? See, that's the problem of the roots of the self-loathing. They shouldn't be there. But when they're there, we get stuck, and it could feel like there's no relief. And if the only relief is to take the loathing in ourselves and apply it to somebody else, that's not a healthy way to exist. And so hypocrisy is a problem, but all of us are grappling with our own hypocrisy, the fact that we're not able to clearly identify what's wrong and fix it. And so we try to bury it, but it still has influence in us. So Jesus says, before you take a speck out of somebody's eye, be aware of the log in your own eye. And that's one of the issues that we find if we take on the task of humble self-reflection, that we find that sometimes we're so in tune with the thing we're struggling with. And in the millions of data points that you encounter in the world, why do you hone in on certain things? Well, your inner reality is shaping what you notice in the world. And so sometimes the very things that bother you in other people, if you're able to pause, you realize the reason that I quickly latch onto that trait and see it everywhere I go is not because everybody is corrupt, but because maybe this is a time for me to recognize that this might be something that I need to work on. And I'm noticing it there because it's something that's inside of me. How many of us have the humility to be able to see that and without hating ourselves, be able to say, you know what, I'm picking up on certain themes here, and maybe it's an area of growth for me. How many of us are able to see that and grow from it instead of excusing it or rationalizing it or ignoring it? And it's that project that Jesus invites us into, genuine growth, thorough from the inside, but it's hard to do on our own. And Jesus doesn't tell us to do it on our own. But when we're trying to do it on our own, just in a moral way, here's a principle, here's what's wrong with me, how do I fix it? There's a turmoil that stays with us. So there's an inner turmoil so long as we remain hypocritical. And so we don't want to remain hypocritical. So the second place that I want to take us is to the lure of relief with idolatry. It can be so hard to walk around with the weight of our own imperfections. And so one means of relief is to take the hatred in you and apply it to others. Another potentially healthier way is to look for the positive things in the world and to eagerly go after them to attain them. And some of you don't walk around with self-loathing. I imagine a lot of you do walk around feeling like, I wish I was better, I don't like myself. Some of you are more free of that than others. But even there, it raises the question on the holistic person. Some people are very able to throw themselves with energy into the world to make the most of things. It could be a more productive way of life. But when you're not busying yourself with doing good things or achieving, and you're just still and by yourself, do you experience satisfaction or do you experience emptiness? And it's that same issue that there's this disconnect between the outside of what we present to the world and the inside. Some of us have such a troubled inside that it poisons how we relate to the outside. Some of us are engaging the outside well, but it's really to keep us distracted because inside we don't know that there's anything of substance. And it's that picture of a hard heart that the Bible portrays, that it's like there's a layer between the inside and the outside. And for some, our troubled selves are trapped inside and we can't get it out to get relief. For some, the great things of the world are outside, but we can't take it in so it really lands and satisfies us. And it's that hardness that's part of God's confrontation in the days of Isaiah. In verse 4, he says, "Because I know you are obstinate." Hard. The other imagery in that verse is an iron neck or a forehead of brass. And you read the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, others, where they talk about our hearts being very hard, our very internal being. There's a hardness, a lack of life. And so this is another passage in Isaiah where there's warnings about idolatry. And the very nature of the idol, the very hardened nature of this statue that they would build that has no actual substance, where you project out your hopes, your desires, aspirations into it. That's the biblical assessment of the idols. There's no power in them. They're made by human beings, and therefore they can't give you life. So be careful what you devote yourself to, because whatever you devote yourself to, we use the language of worship, but even if it's not worship, but just some kind of devotion where you build your identity and you're looking for ultimate satisfaction in anything apart from the living God, will not give you life, but drain yourself of life. And so, what becomes the greater picture of what we become than the idol? And so the idols in Isaiah are described, sometimes they're shiny, they're beautiful, they may be hollow. You take a fine, precious metal like gold or silver and you forge an idol out of it, and on the outside it looks wonderful, but inside there's nothing. And how many of you know that that's not what we want in this world, to have a superficial where beauty and appearance and aesthetics present something to the world, but inside we're hollow? We know we don't want that. And yet we run after idols that are that way. We devote ourselves hoping they'll give us something and we wind up like them. Or Isaiah talks about the idols of wood. You chop down a tree and you form this idol and it's hard and it's firm. And in this chaotic world, you need something of substance to hold on to. You need something you can see and understand and feels like you can control. Where if I just do a few things, if I put these inputs in, these outputs will come out. And when you're desperate, that feels promising. And yet the very nature of that kind of idol, you have the living tree, and we use human wisdom and innovation to cut it down and to forge an idol that once had been living, but now it's a piece of wood that's not living. And yet we ascribe to it a greater power than just having been a tree, one of the living creatures of the world. Now we ascribe divinity to it. And the warning is that was once alive, but once you cut it down and make it into something that you ascribe divinity to, you've actually moved it from a living thing to an inanimate thing. And now you're devoting yourself to that and you're becoming like it. You who had been living are now devoting yourself, you're reforming yourself in a way that the living being becomes dead. And that's the concern that God has for his people, that despite his warnings, don't be impressed by the power of the nations and assume that it's because of their gods that they're succeeding. But patiently wait on me, the invisible God, the God that you can't hold, the God that you can't control, the God that you can't predict, but the God who has watched over you over the generations. If you're patient, listen. And so we see in Isaiah, as the Assyrians come, the people of Jerusalem are told, you don't need to worry about them. Don't make any deal. Don't be tempted to worship idols, but trust me. And if you were with us when we went through that portion, God delivered them. And then God warned, okay, as the Babylonians are here, don't make an alliance with them because you think they'll help you against the Assyrians, because once they get in power, they will conquer you. And that's indeed what happens. That's the context of our passage now. They've been conquered by the Babylonians, and they would be tempted to think the gods of the Babylonians must be superior to our God because look at how they're thriving. And so in today's passage, we're ending a section that begins in chapter 45, that begins where God says, Cyrus of the Persians, I will raise him up, and he will conquer the Babylonians. And so don't be tempted to worship the gods of the Babylonians, because you will find that the Babylonians and their gods are not as powerful as you think. But also, I'm telling you this in advance so that you will not be tempted to then worship the gods of Cyrus and the Persians, thinking that they and their gods are superior. The message is the same. None of these gods are doing anything. It's me who is over the earth. And so in verse 3, Isaiah, speaking for God, says, the former things I declared of old. But then here in verse 5, he says, I declared them to you from of old. Before they came to pass, I announced them to you, lest you should say, my idol did them. My carved image and my metal image commanded them. And it's that superstitious sense that they have where God says, not only am I warning you against idols, so that's in the Ten Commandments, have no other God before me, don't make any image to bow down and worship it, revere the name of God. You know, the explicit instructions are there with the warnings. If you don't listen, you'll suffer the consequences for it. But God here is saying, but the way I've related to you is to help teach you and instruct you. So I did things to show you that I am the living God, in distinction from these human-made idols. And one of the things God says is, I announced to you things in advance before they happened, because only I can do that. So when I told Abraham, this land will be yours, it was hundreds of years later that this was realized, when you were in Egypt and couldn't imagine how you would get out. Only God could bring you out. Then you were afraid to go into the land. Only God could bring you in. And yet the promises announced to Abraham were fulfilled over the generations. Who could do that? Only God. So Isaiah now comes in the same tradition. I announced to you that the Assyrians would come against you, but they wouldn't defeat you. I announced to you in advance that if you stayed on this track, the Babylonians would destroy you, and now they did. I'm announcing to you in advance that Cyrus will arise. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm making the case that if you listen to me, you could trust me. Because the idols don't have that power. No one has that power. And in fact, that's part of the challenge of being human. We don't know the future. And we're very concerned about the future. So anxiety is a future-oriented emotion. We don't know the future, and therefore we worry about the possibilities of what will go wrong. And in that experience where we don't know and we feel unstable and insecure, we want something that we could see, something we could understand, something we could control. And trusting the invisible God of the universe will somehow bring us through this gets tested in those moments. And so for God's own people in the days of Isaiah, with an army coming against us, a prophet announcing we don't need to worry is not quite as convincing as a deal with the larger armies of Egypt, or maybe just seeing if the Babylonian gods are blessing them, maybe if we devote ourselves just a little bit to them, we will bear some of their protection. God says, I'm announcing these things in advance so you don't fall for that. And that today, even in a place like New York, where we think we're secularized and we don't fall for traditional spiritual views, and yet there are fortune tellers. You can find your way around the city to have your palm read, and so there's a sense in which when we get desperate, maybe there's something here. And the warnings of Scripture, the reason not to go to a medium is not because the Bible presents a secular world view of the world, but because there's a world that is spiritually alive. Going to a medium will be a temptation to deception, because perhaps the spirits can see things about you and know them. So in the meeting with the medium, you're trying to decide, how do you know that? Is this a secular thing that there are no spirits? This is just something we're doing, but you have good discernment that you could read me? Or are you telling me things that you could not have known that give me the impression that the spirits are at work? And in that moment, the testimony of Scripture is whether or not that spirit knows something about you at this moment, there is no spirit that knows the future. So if you're taking whatever is happening at this moment and believing this message about the future is real, that's the way deception works. So God says, I will tell you the future. Don't believe anyone else. And so this week, if you were anxiously watching the news as I was, everyone was going back and looking at charts from the 1900s to now, trying to look at the patterns of the economy to project out what might happen in the next week or two, because at the end of the day, nobody knows. If we knew the future. And most cultures throughout time have thought we need to pursue the spirits. In a secular place like New York, what do we hope for the future? Well, we hope in technology, but it's interesting with something technology, why in the 20th century, with such technological advances in stories, did the time machine become part of many narratives? What could we do if we could go into the future? And then when you start to think through that and you're in the realm of theoretical physics, which nobody understands, you realize the time-space continuum is bizarre. And so maybe I can't go to the future, but I go to the past. And what happens? I meet my mother, she falls in love with me. And then she doesn't marry my father, and then will I be born? So the whole time travel thing, very confusing. So here's God is saying, it's been a grace that I'm announcing to you generations in advance what I'm doing. So when I make promises that if you trust me, it will work out well, you believe me, nobody else could offer that to you. And right now, when you're desperate and you can't see me and you think you need to take hold of something more sure, be careful. Because it's that turmoil in us where something's not right that makes us prone to deception. If there's something not right in us and we're looking for something right outside of us, we will believe the one who presents themselves in an exaggerated way and hides the inner reality. And so when we're desperate, which we often are, we need to play the long game, trusting that God will lead us through, and not saying, if I could satisfy my soul with enough popularity, if I could fill my accounts with enough money, if I could have a record that proves to the world that I'm somebody through my achievements, then I will feel at rest. Where we understand there's something in us that will never feel at rest unless we have something of substance. And these temporary fixes provide temporary relief. But if we're not getting substantial relief, we're actually dying while we're creating the image that we're growing. So the third thing, the integrity of the way of Christ. So we have that inner turmoil in us because all of us are just a bit hypocritical. But the lure of relief that is there in idols, we need to recognize we're not going to find life in the things that have been made. The integrity of the way of Christ, the fullness, the wholeness, that's how we move forward. So in this section where Isaiah is saying, on the one hand, I announce to you things in advance so that you don't think an idol did this. You know, the classic paradigm we're thinking through today between causation and correlation. Coincidentally, it didn't rain, so I made an offering to that idol, and then it rained. And the Bible is saying the idol didn't make it happen. There's no causation there. And so Isaiah is saying God is causing things to happen, announcing things in advance that nobody could know or predict or make happen over generations. But it's more than that. It's not just that God is able to foretell the future, but he's able to reveal in advance what he's doing so that if we anchor ourselves on that, we could be sustained. And that's what we see in verse 6. From this time forth, I announce to you new things, things hidden that you have not known, hidden things that you have not known. And so we're finishing one subsection of Isaiah 45 to 48, a word to the people in Babylonian captivity. There's a new empire rising, and that's how you will come out. But chapters 49 to 53 now take on a new topic where we're going to land next week. God has a plan that nobody could understand. It's so deep, it's so profound. Chapter 49 starts to speak about a servant that will come to the world who will suffer. Isaiah 49 to 43, here anticipating that, from this time forth I announce to you new things, hidden things that you have not known. And when Jesus in Matthew 13 starts speaking in parables, people wonder, why are you telling these stories? And he says, because I'm revealing to you things hidden since the foundation of the world. And so Jesus comes saying everything that God announced in advance in all of its distinct ways is now in some remarkable way coming together so that the story of what God has always purposed is being realized. And that's why he begins in Luke, going to the temple, reading the scroll of Isaiah and saying, today this is fulfilled in your hearing. God will do something new, something that we could not have known. And there's a reason why. In verse 7, he says, before today you have never heard of them, lest you should say, behold, I knew them. And it's that stubbornness that God says, despite your hard-heartedness, I have not turned from you. But as you're turning from me, you're making clear that I need to relate to you differently. So on the one hand, I not only give you commandments that should be self-explanatory, but I'm relating to you in a way that should help you. I'm announcing in the future so you know, trust me, don't trust the idol. But he knows it's not enough because anytime he entrusts something to them, they ruin it. And so this new thing that he's doing, the plan of what would be fulfilled in Jesus, would they, in their arrogance, thinking that they know everything, hear the plan and completely squander it? And so it's kind of like these days, a tension a lot of parents feel, a 2 or 3-year-old, you hand them a smartphone and they could figure out how to use it. And they laugh and they smile and they're engaged with it and they want it. And as a parent, you want a child to be happy. And as a tired parent, you want a child to be occupied. And therefore, it's tempting just to give them the phone. And then you have the 8-year-old who swears they're the only kid in the entire school that doesn't have a phone. And so there you are wanting the relief. You want a kid that is healthy, respects you, is happy, is occupied well. And yet, as a decision, you're thinking, I could give you the phone, but it might be better for you if we wait. And the child is thinking, you're a bad parent. And you have to hold to the conviction, actually, I'm trying to be a good parent. There's so much that God does that from our perspective feels like, Lord, but don't you want us to be happy? Don't you just want to give us things that we want? And God is saying, actually, the most remarkable thing I'm not yet telling you, because if I told you now, thinking you know it all, you wouldn't understand it. But it's not because I'm playing a game and withholding good. It's because I'm waiting till the fullness of time in order to do this new thing, this thing that will then show you that you should have trusted me and that even though you didn't, you can trust me. And that's the thing about Jesus as he comes to fulfill all of these things. The nature of the hypocrite is they present an artificial self to the world greater than they are in order that you would not see their flaws. And in Jesus, we get somebody who presents what seems an extraordinarily ordinary self, and yet we're told there's something so profoundly remarkable of substance inside of this person that maybe he doesn't grab your attention because he comes announcing a kingdom, but there's no robe, there's no entourage, there's no trumpets. And so it doesn't excite you, but then you look at who he is. And the more you look, rather than things not making sense, the more you look, there's a depth and integrity. So then you follow his ministry and the religious leaders say, he didn't train with us. How does he have such wisdom? And that's the thing is, Isaiah announces a day where God will send a servant into the world, but the world doesn't have the discernment to see what's going on, and therefore they'll reject him. And yet that servant is the very fulfillment of my plan. This week I saw yet another video of this world-famous musician playing their guitar on the street with nobody stopping. And if you just announced tonight at Madison Square Garden, $200 tickets, stay for 2 hours, people would go. People can't discern. In the wrong context, they couldn't tell that the same person, a Grammy Award winner, is just another guy on the sidewalk. Jesus comes, and because we're so superficial and prone to only believing what's exaggerated, we don't find it compelling until you stop and you listen. And you go back and you say, I don't understand that parable. Teach me. And then you realize that there's something, the very substance of life is in him. He's not here to deceive anyone. He's here to save, to fill the emptiness, to soften the hardness, to give us new hearts. And so that's where Isaiah is saying, one day my servant will come. And it's actually through his suffering and rejection that my people will finally be healed. And God's suffering people in Babylon would say, but how will this suffering bring salvation? And the answer is, it's not this kind of servant, the stubborn, hypocritical, foolish servant, but it's my servant Jesus, my own very son. And when he comes, he will bring life. So here in verse 9, for my name's sake, I defer my anger. And it's that integrity. The world has gone astray, and rather than reorienting me and my plans to you, for the honor of my name, to be true to who I am, rather than venting my anger, I will restrain it. Verse 11, my glory I will not give to another. It's not that God is greedy. It's if he gives his glory to an idol, we'll go and worship the idol. Or we're looking for glory apart from God. God is saying, I'm not going to give it to somebody else so that you can leave me. But for the sake of my name, I will hold on to it so that if you return to me at my invitation, you will have that glory. And so I will give my glory to no other. And then Jesus comes knowing he's going to the cross. And in John 17, he prays, Father, give me the glory that was mine. So God doesn't give his glory to another. But Jesus says, but it's our glory. And then he prays for his followers that they would experience this glory. God is not going to give it away. God is going to invite us to life and to share with him. And so God defers his anger for the generations so that when Jesus comes, Jesus would have us heap the anger that we have. We hate the hypocrite. And yet, ironically, the very people Jesus called hypocrites, the religious leaders and the governmental leaders, they crucify him. And the crowds quickly turn to heap their anger upon him. And somehow the plan of God to deal with what's in us is that he invites us to unload it so that he would bear it. He defers his anger in order that he would satisfy this anger so that rather than having to vent it on us in his justice, he himself would bear it. That's part of the explanation of Jesus on the cross. Jesus is there not venting the anger of God, but bearing this so that God's sinful people could be cleansed, so God's hardened people could be softened, so God's wandering and lost people could be saved and redeemed. And it's that where we say, if this is true, if God is a God that would be right to be angry and vent it on us, but he defers it so that he himself would suffer. If he loves us that much that he would do that for us, why would we not put our eyes there and say, show me more of this glory? Who is so faithful? Who has such integrity? Who is so patient? Who is so humble? Who is so wise? Who is so generous? So how do you get out of the trap of hypocrisy? You need to see what's true and real. And so Jesus says, come, follow me. I will teach you. Look into me. And it's as we're looking into the truth of this Jesus who comes full of grace and truth, as we start to see what's really of substance, that this is the God we can trust, who is faithful, wise, powerful, just, truthful, merciful, kind, all of these things. The more you look at Jesus and the more you see of those things, the more you realize this is possible. It's not just a matter of having to restrain everything wrong in me, but I could open myself up so he works in me. One of the passages that always has struck me personally is when he's being crucified and he prays, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And I think it strikes me because I read the Gospels thinking at some point is he going to show that he's like one of us. He said, pray for those who persecute you, bless those who curse you, that the love of God is such that he even loves his enemy. And then in that moment of extreme suffering, Jesus practiced what he preached. There he was, praying for the forgiveness of the very people who crucified him. What Jesus says, if you see that, there's nothing you can't bring to me. You could open your heart. You could be honest with the fullness of who you are. I already know it's in you. So don't try to hide it. Open it to me, because if our lives are open and I enter into you and you enter into me and my spirit's working, that's when you have a path out of hypocrisy. And it comes not by greater restraint, but it comes by the renewal that only God can do. But he does it. And it doesn't mean that we're instantly perfect, but it means there's hope out of this disconnected life to a life of integrity. And it's by walking with Jesus in his integrity. So as you look in the world, Jesus as a teacher says, I'm going to come and I'm going to show you what's good and right. I'm going to help you to discern what's not right so you won't be lured by it. But that's what lots of people are doing. But there's a different spirit in the world. There's a spirit in the world that's saying, if you walk with me, I'm going to show you where everyone else is wrong. I'm going to expose everything that's wrong, so with me, you could hate them. And the question is, even if that satisfies that cynical thought, even if it makes you feel a little bit better for a moment, is that what you want? Do you want to be able to see what's wrong everywhere so you can hate everything? Or do you want Jesus who comes and says, I'm going to show you what's right in the world, so you're no longer fooled and lured to what's wrong? And I'm going to, with clarity, show you what's wrong and warn you of the danger of it, but I'm going to lead you in what's right. It's a very different way of living in the world, and for that, it requires the fullness of discipleship. We need to trust him. We need to walk in his ways. We need to keep our hearts open to him. But what happens is then we have a way of navigating this world, and that's the challenge of Christianity, which is not that instantly you're made perfect, but that you're loved as you are with your flaws, but God starts to work so that if you're humble enough to be open with your flaws, he starts to unravel the knots. And we want the instant gratification of something that will just take it away so I could feel good about myself for the moment. And we know that's a trap. And God says, if you patiently walk with me, there's grace upon grace. And so be honest with who you really are, and I will make you into something new. And it's the tension that we have to live in, which is none of us are yet who we want to be. And yet something is offered to all of us that can satisfy our souls. And it's as we deepen and mature in that we grow. As I was thinking about this week, so what do? I was thinking of something that some have discerned as the method of the composer Bach and how he composed. So there was a survey maybe 5 years ago that the BBC did that they interviewed something like 175 composers. Who would you say is the best composer? Bach became number one in that list. And yet in Bach's life, his life was not easy. And so during one period, he had a benefactor, and it was a period where he was able to compose, but then the money dried up and he had to go get a job. And there was a church job, I think it was in Leipzig. And for him, it was a step down. He didn't want the church job. This was failure. And then he applied for it and he was not the top candidate. So here he is thinking this is a step down for me. And then they offer it to somebody who says, no thanks. And they offered it to at least one other person, if not two. But in the city records, one of the city councilor people said something to the effect of, if we couldn't get somebody great, we'll settle for somebody mediocre. Bach. Imagine that, like that. That's your welcome to your new position letter. And so I have no idea about the emotional world of Bach, but we know that he was a committed Christian from his letters, from correspondences. But what people have noticed is on his scores, he tends to put JJ on the top, Latin for Jesus help. Sometimes JH, not, I think he thinks in German, not in English. Jesus help. I'm sitting down to do my work. These days, everyone would say, this is the genius. This is the human being who had what none of us could fathom, and he sits down to work and he needs help. Jesus, help me. And then he ends his score and he puts SDG, Sola Deo Gloria, to God alone be the glory. He begins, I need help, and he ends hoping that this has been done for the glory of God. And you'd think if there was a guy that didn't need prayer, but that could just rely on his own genius, this would be it. And then you find yourself thinking, actually, maybe it was the genius, the profound nature of the music, because this was his method. So this week, you're going to wake up in the morning and you're going to have an inclination, I'm not good enough, or I'm not ready for the day. Jesus, help. And at the end of the day, you're going to say, I could have done better, but to God be the glory. I'm going to entrust that to you. For some of you, it might be the work itself. You sit down at that exam, and you open the pamphlet, and you write JJ up on the top, making sure that if you get a good score, it's not attributed to somebody else. But you show up at that meeting, whatever it is that you do, you wake up with the kids and you say, Jesus, help. And then at some time you have to say, I'm done. And then you just commit it to the Lord. Lord, if this was done honorably well, may you get the glory. It's remarkable when we're overwhelmed with trying to be somebody that everyone will acknowledge, that the turmoil in us of the world never acknowledging our greatness, the freedom that Jesus invites us to, which is you don't have to worry about yourself because I have your back. So things will be so much better for you than you could imagine because my love for you is more profound than you could realize. When that frees you to say, I no longer need to justify my existence. I no longer need to do this work so that I'll be thanked or applauded or rewarded. But I can do it because of life with Christ. And at the end, if he receives glory, I'm going to be free of this turmoil. Because while I'm wanting to settle for my own glory, wouldn't it be better if I'm invited into this greater glory? And so that's the ongoing path of integrity. We don't need to be hypocritical because none of us are perfect. We don't need to present an exaggerated self to the world. We have a God who's far greater than what we can imagine. And so when we focus ourselves there and trust him and serve for his glory, we find that we have a path forward. Let me pray for us. Our Father, we bring the reality of ourselves here today with our flaws, but also with the turmoil that is going around in our hearts and minds, maybe the awareness of the turmoil we've caused this week because we haven't restrained these problematic thoughts or impulses. And yet, Lord, you invite us week by week to worship, and you tell us that as we look to you week by week, you are changing us from one form of glory that is not glorious to another form that truly is. And so, Lord, we look to you today with whatever measure of faith we have in us now. And we pray that you'd open our eyes to see something of that grace and glory so that it would soften our hearts, invigorate our spirits, and send us into the world, not self-conscious, but free, that with you we could watch for great things, greater than we could imagine. Bless us as we try that this week in Jesus' name. Amen.